Ever wondered where the concept of you truly comes from? That question isn't just poetic. It cuts to the very heart of what it means to be human. And the surprising answer traces back to one man, often overlooked outside of philosophy classrooms, but whose ideas shaped the very foundations of psychology, neuroscience, education, and even democracy. His name? John Locke, the philosopher who defined our minds. Locke wasn't just a thinker, he was a revolutionary. He dared to suggest that we are not born with preloaded ideas, but instead with a mind like a blank slate, what he famously called tabula rasa. Everything we become, every idea we hold, every belief we cling to is formed by our experiences. This radical insight turned the world of philosophy upside down. It reshaped how we think about childhood, learning, morality, and even freedom. In fact, you're living your life today according to principles Locke imagined over 300 years ago, even if you've never heard his name. But let's not start at the end of his story. To understand Locke's genius, we need to step back into 17th century England, a world of religious wars, political revolutions, and radical new discoveries about science and nature. John Locke was born in 1632 in Somerset, England, during a time of extraordinary turmoil. England was not a safe or settled land. Civil war tore the nation apart, pitting monarch against parliament and faith against faith. The very idea of truth was up for debate. Was it defined by kings, by churches, or by reason itself? Locke grew up watching this chaos unfold, and it shaped his restless curiosity. He studied at Westminster School and later at Christ Church, Oxford. But unlike many of his peers, he wasn't satisfied memorizing ancient texts and rigid doctrines. He was drawn instead to the rising stars of the new scientific revolution, men like Robert Boyle and Isaac Newton, who were redefining how humans could discover truth, not through authority, but through observation and evidence. This was Locke's great revelation. The mind itself could be studied, not as something fixed by God, but as something shaped by experience, trial, and error. Just as scientists tested hypotheses in the laboratory, Locke believed we develop our beliefs, morals, and identities through the laboratory of life itself. In 1690, Locke published his masterpiece, an essay concerning human understanding. At over 600 pages, it was a monumental attempt to explain the workings of the human mind. But its core insight was simple and explosive. We are not born with knowledge. We are not hardwired with eternal truths or divine ideas. Instead, our minds are like white paper, written upon by the pen of experience. Think about what that means. It means that no child is doomed by birth. No person is limited by their ancestry, their religion, or their class. Knowledge and character are not inherited. They are cultivated. For Locke, education became the single most powerful force in shaping who we are. We are all, by nature, equal, he argued, and that equality is rooted in the fact that our minds begin the same way, empty, open, and full of potential. That insight might sound obvious to us today, but at the time, it was revolutionary. It directly challenged the dominant belief that kings ruled by divine right, that social hierarchies were fixed by God, and that people were born destined to be rulers or subjects, masters or servants. Locke's blank slate shattered those assumptions, opening the door to democracy, freedom, and equality. But Locke wasn't only a philosopher of the mind, he was also a political revolutionary. In two treatises of government published anonymously in 1689, Locke argued that legitimate governments derive their power from the consent of the governed, not from the will of kings. This single idea became the intellectual foundation of modern democracy. You've probably heard the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's Thomas Jefferson, writing in the American Declaration of Independence. But those words were directly inspired by John Locke, who who had written of life, liberty and property as the natural rights of all human beings. Without Locke, there might never have been an American Revolution, or at least not one founded on the principles of equality and freedom we celebrate today. And yet, for all his political impact, Locke's most lasting influence may lie in how we think about ourselves, our consciousness, our identity, our very sense of being. Locke was one of the first philosophers to ask, what makes you you? Is it your soul, your body, your memories? His answer was both profound and deeply human. You are your consciousness. Your identity comes from your memory, your ability to look back and say, yes, I remember doing that. I remember being that person. In other words, you are the story you tell yourself about your life. This idea was groundbreaking. It laid the foundation for modern psychology's focus on memory and identity. Neuroscience today, with its study of brain plasticity and the role of memory in shaping behavior, still echoes Locke's insights. Even debates about artificial intelligence, what makes a machine conscious, and whether memory equals identity, owe a silent debt to Locke. But Locke's life wasn't easy. He lived much of it under threat, persecuted for his radical ideas. He spent years in exile in Holland, fleeing political enemies. His works were banned at times, and he had to disguise his writings to avoid imprisonment. And yet, despite hardship, he never gave up on his vision of a freer, more rational world. That perseverance is part of why his story is so inspiring. Locke wasn't a man of privilege protected by power. He was a thinker who risked everything to defend the idea that human beings could think for themselves, that ordinary people had extraordinary potential. Let's pause here for a moment. What does all this mean for us in 2025? Why should you care about John Locke? Because his ideas are alive in your daily life. Every time you talk about personal growth, every time you believe education can change someone's future, every time you imagine democracy as government by the people, you are speaking Locke's language. His philosophy is the invisible architecture of our modern world. But here's the motivation. Locke's vision isn't just history, it is a challenge. He believed we are shaped by experience, which means every choice you make, every environment you step into, every book you read, every person you listen to, is shaping the person you will become. Your mind is not fixed. You are not trapped. You are a work in progress, a story still being written. That's why Locke's philosophy isn't only about ideas, it's about action. It's about realizing that no matter where you start, no matter how chaotic the world seems, you have the power to shape yourself, to grow, to transform. That's not just philosophy, that's hope. Today, we often hear that the world is polarized, divided, and drowning in misinformation. Locke would have recognized these struggles, but he would remind us that reason, experience, and open-mindedness are the tools we need. He would remind us that education is not just about facts, but about cultivating the capacity to think critically, to empathize, and to grow. And perhaps most importantly, he would remind us that freedom is not a gift handed down from above. It is something we build, protect, and live out every day. John Locke died in 1704, but his legacy lives on. He may not have built machines or conquered nations, but he did something far greater. He gave us the blueprint for understanding ourselves. He redefined what it means to be human, and his challenge echoes to us still. Your mind is your canvas. What will you paint on it? So the next time you wonder where your sense of self comes from, the next time you wrestle with questions of identity, freedom, or growth, remember the forgotten genius who shaped those very ideas. John Locke, the philosopher who defined our minds, and in doing so, helped define our future. And maybe, just maybe, his greatest lesson for us is this: you already carry the power to change your life, because you already carry the power to change your mind.